everything at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm gonna, even though I had pressed these seams open flat for purposes of stitching, I'm actually gonna leave them flat, like I'm going to keep them together like that. No need to back tack because you're sewing right in the seam allowance.
And that's a 1/2 inch.
1/2 inch. Make sure that everything is laying flat.
You said 1/2 inch?
1/2 inch. 1/2 inch. Now I'm coming up to my mark at my shoulder, right? So I am going to stitch and stop. I'm going to stop the machine and I'm going to walk it right to that point. Pull it up. Turn around, knot it. Pull the thread through and knot it. Come on, thread. Right back to where I ended. And now I'm going to flip that shoulder seam over and then start my stitching again. But notice where I'm stitching. I'm stitching only on the lower edge. I'm making sure that this folded flap stays out of the firing line of the needle. So flip that over and position it precisely where you ended. Drop your needle, and you can just pull back this top layer and make sure that underneath, because it's a curved seam, there's a tendency for things to sort of gather up into itself. So as you're sewing, always make sure that you're pulling up and making sure that everything underneath is laying flat. Hopefully. Inch. Again, just always feeling that everything is, you can feel the different layers and that everything is smooth. You don't want anything creasing underneath. All right, now this side we're doing just the opposite. We're folding the flap over and we're stitching right to that clip mark on the collar. Go slow, 1, 2, 3. This side, pull your thread through.
That's where you marked with the powder also,
right? Right. So you see, we're sewing the neckline in 3 segments. Facing side, neckline side, and the other facing side. All right, now I put it back once again, final step. But now I'm sewing the facing. Again, making sure that everything is laying flat. Half an inch. And you'll see as you're sewing this that if you slightly stretch it, it just gives you a nice smooth seam. Edge. edge, no need to back tack. Once again, pull your threads.
Why don't you backtrack to avoid having to do that?
I find that, although it's a pain in the ass, I find that a couple of things. Backtacking, depending on the fabric you're working with, can add bulk to a seam, you know, slight though it may be. The other thing is if you ever have to go in and take something out, if you backtack, it's a pain. And you start ripping the fabric, and no, I'm not a big fan of backtacking. All right, so this is what we should look like. Right? So again, my shoulder seams on the facings are loose. Everything is attached at the neckline. The center portion, the neckline portion, is free on the top collar, right? And my facings are stitched in place. At the corners of the facings, I want to clip my corners very close to the stitch line, but not too close. You don't want to run the risk of puncturing the fabric. Turn it, poke it through with your finger. Take your chopstick or your pointer, get a better point. Okay, so you can see it's starting to take shape. Right? Nice clean finish. All right, so once we're done with that, what you want to do is you want to take your facing edge, all right, your seam allowance and the whole facing, and just lift it up. And all of this seam allowance, the neckline seam allowance, I want to clip that, all the layers, I want to clip it right up to my notch point. And again, on this side, flip my seam allowance from the facing, flip that up, and you can tell what you're doing because that's the side that has the fusible interfacing. Flip that up because you don't want to clip that. Flip that up, and then you want to clip all the remaining layers up to the notch mark. Okay. Now that we've clipped it, we now can tuck that seam allowance underneath the flap that we created. And this is the reason why we created that flap, so that we can tuck the seam allowance underneath. Oh, I'm sorry, back up. Before you do anything, you want to go in and on your neckline and your facing edge, the rounded edge of the neckline, you want to go in and clip, just so that as we turn everything sits properly. So you want to go in and about every ½ inch, clip, not too close enough, but not too close to the seam line. Again, always being careful not to run the risk of clipping your actual seam. You just want to clip the entire neckline.
Why don't you want to just clip that off to reduce the bulk?
You can, but if you go too close, then you run the risk,
Okay.
depending on the fabric, of the fabric fraying, and you know, after it's washed once or twice, you always want to maintain that seam allowance.
Have you ever known anyone to sew another line to enforce it from using thread?
Yeah, I have seen people do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you recommend that, or is that a waste of time?
No, not that it's a waste of time, but it can, again, depending on the fabric, it can add a little bulk
Okay.
that you maybe not want. So, all right. So now that we've clipped everything, again, we take that center of the back neckline and we're going to tuck up all that seam allowance under that flap. And just loosely pin it. We'll get back to doing a proper pinning later, but just loosely pin it so that the folded edge is meeting your seam line. All right, look at that beautiful clean finish, right? Who knew? Who knew? And definitely starting to look like something. Now this, I'm going to take this loose edge, I'm gonna wrap it